Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship watching the stars through the main window. The year was 2387 and humans had spread across 12 different star systems, building mining colonies and research stations. His ship, the New Horizon, was on a routine exploration mission in the outer edge of human space when something changed everything. The communication officer, Tony Garcia, suddenly straightened in his chair and called out that they were receiving an unknown signal. Jake walked over to the communication station and listened as strange sounds filled the bridge. The signal was unlike anything they had heard before, with complex mathematical patterns that seemed to repeat every 47 minutes. Dr. Lisa Carter, the ship's xenolinguist, rushed to the bridge when she heard about the signal. She was a tall woman with brown hair who had spent her entire career studying alien languages, even though humans had never found any aliens before. Lisa took the signal to her laboratory and began working on it immediately while Jake ordered the ship to stay in position. For 3 days, Lisa worked without rest trying to understand the strange transmission. She ran the signal through every computer program and mathematical system known to humanity. The patterns were too complex to be natural, but too organized to be random noise. On the third night, she finally made a breakthrough that would change human history forever. Lisa burst into Jake's quarters at 3 a.m. with tears in her eyes. She told him that the signal was a distress call from an alien civilization calling themselves the Villani. The mathematical sequences were actually a form of language that described their desperate situation in detail. Jake called all the senior officers to the main briefing room where Lisa explained what she had discovered. The Villani had been sending their message for over 3 years, hoping that someone would hear them and come to help. Their homeworld, Vila Prime, was under attack by creatures they called the Devourers. The message described the Devourers as crystalline beings that consumed entire worlds, leaving nothing but empty rock behind them. They moved from planet to planet, destroying everything in their path. The Villani had fought them for years, but they were losing badly. Their colonies had already fallen and their homeworld was surrounded. Lisa played the translated message for the officers and everyone listened in silence. The alien voice was calm at first, describing their technology and their civilization. But as the message continued, the voice became more desperate. The Villani explained that they had tried everything to stop the Devourers, but nothing worked. The worst part came at the end of the message when the voice changed completely. It was no longer the calm tone of a military officer, but the frightened cries of Villani children calling for their parents. The recording captured the final moments before a Villani colony was destroyed. The sounds of fear and death filled the briefing room until Lisa turned off the transmission. Jake immediately sent a message to Earth Central Command describing what they had found. The response came back within hours from Commander Rick Hayes, who ordered them to return to Earth immediately with all their data. The signal and its translation would need to be verified by experts before any decisions could be made. During the journey back to Earth, Lisa continued working on the signal and found more information hidden in the transmission. The Villani had included star charts showing the location of their system and tactical data about the Devourers. The enemy ships were made of living crystal that could repair themselves and grow stronger by consuming planetary materials. The Villani message also contained warnings about the Devourers' methods of attack. They did not just destroy civilizations, but transformed the survivors into crystal hybrid creatures that served their new masters. Entire populations had been converted into mindless servants that helped the Devourers consume more worlds. When the New Horizon reached Earth, Jake and Lisa were immediately taken to Central Command headquarters. They presented their findings to a room full of military leaders, scientists, and government officials. The room was silent as Lisa played the translated message and showed the star charts indicating where the Villani homeworld was located. Commander Hayes asked many questions about the reliability of the translation and whether this could be some kind of trap. Lisa showed them her work and explained how she had verified every part of the message using multiple translation methods. The mathematics were too complex and consistent to be fake. The debate continued for hours, with some officials arguing that humanity should not get involved in an alien war. They pointed out that the Devourers sounded extremely powerful and might come after Earth if humans interfered. Others argued that if the message was real, then humanity had a moral duty to help. The discussion ended when Lisa played the final part of the message again. The cries of the Villani children echoed through the room and everyone fell silent. Commander Hayes looked around at all the faces staring at him and made the decision that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. He ordered the immediate mobilization of the entire human fleet. Admiral Susan Clark took command of the largest military force humanity had ever put together. 847 warships gathered at the staging area near Jupiter, ranging from small fast destroyers to massive dreadnoughts that could level entire cities. Her flagship Terras, Roth led the armada as they prepared for the 6-month journey through hyperspace to reach the Kepler system. The mobilization happened faster than anyone thought possible. Every human colony contributed ships and crew members to the fleet. Mining vessels were converted into troop transports while civilian freighters became supply ships, carrying ammunition, food, and medical supplies. The entire human race was united behind a single mission to help strangers they had never met during the long journey to Kepler. The Villani managed to send additional transmissions before their communication systems were destroyed. Dr. Carter worked with teams of linguists and scientists to translate every piece of information they received. What they learned about the Devourers was terrifying and gave everyone nightmares. The Devourers were silicon-based hive minds that viewed all organic life as contamination that needed to be cleansed from the galaxy. They have been destroying civilizations for over 1,000 years, moving from system to system in an endless campaign of extermination. The Villani had found records showing that at least 40 different species had been completely wiped out. Colonel Danny Ross began training special assault teams for ground combat against crystalline enemies. He had been a Marine for 20 years and had fought in every major human conflict, but nothing had prepared him for this. The Devourers did not think or fight like any enemy humans had ever faced before. Marine Sergeant Amy Foster worked with weapons experts to develop new tactics for fighting crystal-based life forms. Traditional bullets and explosives had limited effect on the Devourers, but sonic weapons could shatter their crystal structures. Every human soldier was equipped with sound grenades and vibration rifles designed specifically for this mission. Engineer Ben Taylor spent every waking hour modifying human weapons and equipment. The Devourers were immune to most forms of energy weapons, but they could be damaged by sustained kinetic attacks. Taylor redesigned the fleet's main guns to fire depleted uranium rounds that could punch through crystal armor. The human fleet encountered their first Villani refugees at the edge of the Kepler system. 3 damaged ships limped toward the human armada, carrying the last survivors from the outer colonies. The aliens were humanoid, but taller than humans, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sadness. Captain Alex Stone was chosen to make first contact with the Villani survivors. He had studied xenolinguistics and could speak their language well enough to communicate basic ideas. The meeting took place aboard the medical ship Mercy, where human doctors were already treating wounded Villani refugees. The Villani told horrifying stories about the war against the Devourers. The crystal beings did not just kill their enemies, but transformed entire worlds into factory planets that produced new ships and warriors. They had perfected a process that could convert any form of matter into living crystal that served their will. Elder Keth was the leader of the surviving Villani, and he could barely believe that another species had come to help them. He explained that they had sent distress calls to every corner of the galaxy for 3 years, but no one had ever responded. Most civilizations had hidden themselves when they learned about the Devourers rather than risk becoming targets. The refugees described the final battle for Vila Prime in detail. The Devourer ships had surrounded the planet and begun the conversion process, while the remaining Villani military tried desperately to evacuate civilians. Thousands of ships had been destroyed trying to break through the crystal blockade, and most of the population was trapped on the surface. As the human fleet moved deeper into the system, long-range sensors began detecting the true scope of the disaster. Vela Prime appeared on their screens as a glittering jewel, but the beautiful crystal formations covering the planet's surface represented death and transformation on an unimaginable scale. The Devourers had already begun converting the world's core materials into new weapons. Admiral Clark called a meeting of all ship commanders to discuss their battle plan. The tactical situation was worse than they had expected, with over 200 Devourer ships patrolling the system in crystal formations spreading across multiple planets. The enemy had clearly been here for months and was well established. Intelligence reports from Vellani survivors revealed that the Devourers followed predictable patterns in their attacks. They always began by establishing orbital supremacy, then landed ground forces to begin planetary conversion. The process took approximately 6 months to complete, after which they would move on to the next target system. The human commanders studied every piece of available data about Devourer tactics and technology. The crystal ships were fast and heavily armed, but they seemed to rely on standard attack formations. The aliens had clearly never faced an enemy that fought with the chaotic, unpredictable methods that humans preferred. Dr. Carter made an important discovery while analyzing Devourer communication intercepts. The crystalline beings showed no signs of individual personality or emotion in their transmissions. They operated as a perfect collective consciousness that never doubted itself or changed its methods. This gave them tremendous coordination, but also made them predictable. Colonel Ross finished training his assault teams just as the fleet reached the outer planets of the Kepler system. His Marines were equipped with the latest sonic weapons and had practiced urban combat scenarios designed to simulate fighting in crystal cities. They were ready for ground operations, but everyone knew the casualties would be enormous. The final preparation involved loading every ship with as much ammunition as possible. The human fleet carried enough firepower to level entire continents, and Admiral Clark was prepared to use all of it. She had studied the records of the 40 civilizations that the Devourers had destroyed, and was determined that humanity would not become number 41. As Terra's wrath led the fleet toward Vela Prime, Admiral Clark sent one final message to Earth Command. She reported that they had made contact with Vellani survivors and confirmed the enemy presence in the system. The battle for Vela Prime would begin at dawn, and humanity was ready to show the galaxy what happened when predators met protectors. The battle for Vela Prime began at dawn over the planet's largest continent as human ships dropped out of hyperspace directly into the Devourer formation. The crystalline aliens had not expected anyone to answer the Vellani distress call, and certainly not a species they had never encountered before. Their beautiful but deadly ships moved to intercept the human fleet with perfect coordination. Admiral Clark had decided on a strategy that went against every rule in the military handbook. Instead of maintaining formation and engaging at long range, her ships scattered in all directions and attacked from multiple angles simultaneously. The Devourers tried to adapt to this chaotic approach, but their perfect coordination became a weakness when facing unpredictable human tactics. Captain Steve Mitchell commanded the destroyer Defiant and had volunteered for the most dangerous mission of the battle. His ship accelerated directly toward the largest Devourer vessel, ignoring all the crystal fighters that swarmed around him. His crew fired everything they had while racing toward their target, knowing they would never return home. The Deviant crashed into the Devourer capital ship at maximum speed, and Mitchell detonated his reactor core in the moment of impact. The explosion created a chain reaction that shattered 3 enemy vessels and sent crystal fragments flying in all directions. The sight of a human ship sacrificing itself for the mission shocked the Devourers, who could not understand such illogical behavior. On the planet's surface, Colonel Ross led the first wave of human Marines through the converted city of New Kethra. The streets were lined with crystal spires that pulsed with trapped consciousness from dead Vellani citizens. The Devourers had transformed captured aliens into hybrid creatures that attacked their own kind under crystal control. Lieutenant Julie Adams pushed through the horror with her squad, trying to reach a group of Vellani civilians trapped in the city center. The crystal hybrids moved like puppets controlled by invisible strings and showed no recognition when they encountered their former friends and family members. Adams ordered her Marines to show mercy by ending their suffering quickly. The sonic weapons worked better than expected against the crystalline enemies, but the Devourers learned fast and began adapting their formations. Within hours, they had developed new tactics to counter the human sound grenades, and were deploying crystal shields that absorbed vibration attacks. Sergeant Foster discovered that the Devourers felt no pain, fear, or emotion of any kind. They were logic incarnate and approached every situation with mathematical precision. When her Marines used desperate last stands and suicide attacks the crystal beings could not process these illogical actions and often hesitated at critical moments, the human medical teams faced horrors beyond imagination as they tried to help wounded Villani civilians. Dr. Patricia Wells led a team into the underground caverns where survivors had been hiding for months. The aliens were starving and traumatized, but still fought to protect their children from the crystal conversion process. Corporal Tim Baker was leading his squad through a collapsed residential district when they heard the cries of Villani children, trapped under crystal debris. The building was unstable and covered with crystal growths that would collapse if disturbed, but Baker could not ignore the sounds of frightened youngsters calling for help. Baker ordered his squad to stay back while he crawled into the dangerous structure with explosive charges strapped to his chest. The crystal formations were growing rapidly and would soon trap the children forever. He reached the survivors and helped them escape through a tunnel, but the building began collapsing as they fled. The young Marine made a decision that defined the human character for the Devourers. Instead of trying to escape, Baker detonated his charges and brought down the entire crystal tower to clear an escape route for the children. His sacrifice saved 12 young Villani but cost humanity one of its bravest soldiers. Dr. Carter had been monitoring Devourer communications throughout the battle and noticed something strange in their transmissions. The crystal beings were having difficulty processing human tactical decisions and were requesting guidance from their command structure more frequently than normal. Their perfect logic was being disrupted by human unpredictability. The Villani survivors hiding in the underground tunnel systems began emerging to help the human forces. Elder Keth led a group of volunteer fighters who knew the city layout and could guide human squads through the crystal maze. The aliens had given up hope until they saw humans dying to save strangers. Captain Morrison landed his damaged ship in the middle of the battlefield and organized a mobile command post. His communications equipment was still working, and he coordinated between the ground teams and the orbital battle. The sight of humans fighting with such determination inspired the surviving Villani to join the fight. The Devourers controlled most of the planet's surface, but they had never faced an enemy that refused to follow logical military doctrine. Human commanders made decisions based on emotion and intuition rather than mathematical calculations. This chaos was something the crystal minds could not predict or counter effectively. As the first day of battle ended, Admiral Clark received casualty reports that made her heart sink. Over 15,000 human soldiers had died in the initial assault, and many more were wounded or missing. The Devourers were adapting to human tactics with frightening speed and learning to counter their weapons, but something important had changed in the equation. The crystal beings were no longer invincible in their own minds. They had encountered an enemy that could hurt them, and more importantly, an enemy that would sacrifice everything for others. The mathematical perfection that had made them unstoppable for 1,000 years was starting to crack. Lieutenant Adams reached the Villani civilians she had been trying to save and found families huddled together in a basement shelter. The children looked up at her with hope in their large dark eyes, and she realized why humans had traveled across the galaxy to fight. These innocents deserved a chance to live free from crystal slavery, the battle reports that reached Earth described. The first day is a costly victory. Humanity had secured 3 cities and established a foothold on Vela Prime, but the price had been enormous. The Devourers were learning to fight humans, but they still could not understand why any species would die for strangers they had never met. Admiral Clark stood on the bridge of Terra's Wrath watching tactical displays that showed the true scope of the Devourer threat. The crystal beings had spread across 17 different worlds in the system. and were adapting to human tactics faster than her strategists had predicted. Conventional warfare would not be enough to stop an enemy that learned from every engagement and modified their approach accordingly. She made a decision that would define humanity's reputation throughout the galaxy for centuries to come. There would be no rules, no mercy, and no holding back. The Devourers had shown what they did to civilizations that tried to fight them fairly. Humanity would respond with total war and unlimited fury. Operation Glasshammer began at 4 in the morning, when every human ship in the system simultaneously launched kinetic bombardments at crystal formations on 17 different planets. The Devourers had spread their forces thin, confident that their superiority would protect them from any counterattack. They had not calculated humanity's willingness to sacrifice everything for strangers. Commander Gary West volunteered to lead the most dangerous mission of the war. His team of 30 Marines would infiltrate the Devourer mothership and plant experimental quantum bombs. Designed by Dr. Nancy Price, the plan was simple but suicidal. Detonate the bombs inside the enemy flagship and watch the chain reaction destroy half their fleet. The infiltration team launched in stealth pods that used Villani technology to avoid crystal sensors. West had been a Special Forces operative for 15 years but had never attempted anything this dangerous. His volunteers knew they would not survive the mission, but every one of them had seen what the Devourers did to innocent civilians on Vila Prime's surface. Captain Linda Nash made a discovery that changed everything for the human forces. Hidden beneath the capital city, she found thousands of Villani children kept in stasis pods to protect them from the conversion process. The sight of these sleeping innocents, so similar to human children, ignited a rage in the Marines that the Devourers could not measure or understand. Nash called for immediate evacuation support, and her communications were heard by human forces across the planet. Within hours, every available transport was converging on the capital to rescue the children. The Devourers tried to stop the evacuation, but found themselves facing humans who fought with desperate fury rather than military tactics. Sergeant Foster's platoon had stopped taking prisoners after witnessing crystal conversion ceremonies. When they encountered Villani, who had been partially transformed into crystal hybrids, the Marines granted them mercy through quick death rather than leave them as slaves to their former enemies. The sight of tortured aliens being freed from crystal control spread through the human ranks like wildfire. The Devourers began experiencing something they had never felt in their 1,000-year history. Their mathematical models could not predict human behavior, and their tactical computers were providing contradictory solutions. For the first time since their species had achieved consciousness, they felt doubt about their methods and goals. West's infiltration team reached the Devourer mothership and began placing quantum charges throughout the massive crystal structure. The enemy flagship was beautiful beyond description, with geometric patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. But its beauty could not hide the fact that it was built from the converted remains of 40 different civilizations. Private Chris Johnson was barely 19 years old when he made the discovery that turned the war in humanity's favor. During a firefight with crystal warriors, he was wounded and his blood splattered across enemy armor. The acidic human blood began dissolving the Devourer's crystal structure, causing the creature to collapse in agony. Johnson's squad leader immediately reported the discovery to command, and within hours every human weapon was being modified with blood-tipped ammunition. The crystalline beings who had seemed invincible suddenly found themselves vulnerable to the most basic human biological function. Their perfect forms began dissolving under sustained blood attacks. The psychological effect on the Devourers was devastating. They had considered organic life forms to be inferior contamination, but now that same contamination was literally eating them alive. Their collective consciousness began showing signs of panic for the first time in their existence. Dr. Carter analyzed intercepted Devourer communications and found evidence that their hive mind was fragmenting under the stress of combat with humans. Individual crystal nodes were questioning orders and requesting clarification on tactical decisions. The perfect unity that had made them unstoppable was breaking down. West's team completed their mission just as Devour security forces discovered their presence. The quantum bombs were armed and ready to detonate, but the Marines were trapped deep inside the enemy ship with no escape route. West made the final transmission that would be remembered in human history books forever. He told Admiral Clark that the mission was complete and the charges were ready. His team had done their duty and saved countless lives by destroying the enemy flagship. West asked that their families be told they had died fighting for something bigger than themselves. Then he triggered the detonator. The explosion tore through the Devourer mothership like acid through paper. The quantum reaction spread from crystal node to crystal node, destroying the massive vessel from the inside out. The chain reaction continued into nearby enemy ships, creating a cascade of destruction that eliminated over 40% of the crystal fleet in minutes. The remaining Devourers attempted to retreat from the system but found their escape routes blocked by human ships that had been waiting for this moment. Admiral Clark had anticipated their tactical withdrawal and positioned her fastest vessels to prevent any crystal ships from reaching hyperspace. Nash successfully evacuated over 8,000 Villani children from the stasis facility beneath the capital city. The rescue operation took 12 hours and cost the lives of over 200 human Marines, but every child was saved. The sight of sleeping alien youngsters being carried to safety by human soldiers became the defining image of the war. The tide had turned completely in humanity's favor. Crystal formations across 17 worlds were being destroyed by blood-tipped, kinetic rounds while sonic weapons shattered enemy ground forces. The Devourers who had terrorized the galaxy for a millennium were retreating for the first time in their species' existence. Foster led her Marines in a final assault on the main Crystal Command Center in the capital city. The building was a geometric nightmare that housed the primary conversion equipment used to transform Villani civilians. Her troops moved through corridors lined with stasis tubes containing partially converted aliens who begged for death rather than continued slavery. The human attack was not just military but deeply personal. Every Marine had seen the crystal conversion chambers and understood what the Devourers did to their prisoners. The fury that drove them forward was not just tactical, but moral. They were fighting to ensure that no other species would suffer the same fate as the Villani. The surviving Devourers made their final desperate attempt to escape by opening a portal to their home dimension where they harvested energy from dying stars. The crystal beings had never retreated before, but humanity had broken their perfect mathematical confidence and filled them with something they had never experienced. Fear drove them toward their dimensional gateway with human ships in pursuit. Admiral Clark had anticipated this moment and prepared accordingly, using captured Villani technology combined with human engineering. Dr. Taylor had created a dimensional anchor that could trap the crystal fleet in normal space. The device was experimental and dangerous, but it was their only chance to prevent the Devourers from escaping to threaten other civilizations. The anchor activated just as the first enemy ships reached the portal, creating a massive energy feedback that rippled across the entire system. Space itself seemed to bend and twist as the dimensional gateway collapsed, trapping over 100 crystal vessels between realities. The Devourers found themselves completely cut off from their power source and unable to retreat. What followed was not a battle, but a systematic execution. The human fleet surrounded the trapped crystal ships and opened fire with every weapon they possessed. Kinetic rounds tipped with human blood punched through enemy armor while sonic weapons shattered their perfect geometric forms. The beings that had terrorized 40 civilizations were reduced to glittering dust among the stars. Captain Morrison watched the final battle from a hospital bed on Vila Prime. His body broken during the ground assault, but his spirit unbroken. Through the medical facility windows, he could see human transport ships evacuating the last Villani survivors while combat engineers worked to remove crystal formations from the planet's surface. The victory was complete, but the cost had been devastating. Of the 847 ships that had entered the Kepler system, only 312 remained operational. The human fleet had been reduced to barely one-third of its original strength. Casualty reports showed that over 180,000 human servicemen and women had died during the campaign. Entire battalions had been wiped out during the ground fighting. The Villani survivors emerged from their underground shelters to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. The complete destruction of the Devourers was broadcast across every frequency as the last crystal ship exploded into fragments. Elder Keth led a group of his people to the human command post where Admiral Clark was coordinating relief efforts. The old Villani leader approached Clark with tears streaming down his blue face and spoke in broken English that he had learned from human soldiers. His question would be remembered by both species for generations. He asked why humanity had come to help them when they were complete strangers who could offer nothing in return for such sacrifice. Clark's response became legend throughout known space when it was recorded and transmitted to Earth. She told Elder Keth that someone had to answer their call for help because it was the right thing to do. No species should have to face extinction alone in the darkness when others could hear their cries for aid. The work of healing both species began immediately, as human medical ships treated thousands of wounded Villani while combat engineers started the massive task of removing crystal formations from contaminated worlds. The Devourers had left behind a toxic legacy that would take years to completely clean up, but humanity was committed to seeing the job finished. Dr. Carter worked with Villani scientists to understand the conversion process and develop methods to reverse its effects. Some of the crystal hybrids could be saved if treated quickly enough, but many had been too thoroughly changed. The psychological trauma of seeing their own people transformed into enemies would haunt Villani society for decades. Colonel Ross established military academies on the liberated worlds where human tactics and weapons training were shared with Villani defense forces. The aliens had fought bravely, but they needed to learn new methods to defend themselves against future threats. Humanity would not always be available to answer distress calls. The news of the Devourer defeat spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed communications could carry it. Species that had been hiding for centuries began emerging from their shelter worlds to confirm that the crystal threat was finally over. The psychological impact on galactic civilization was enormous. Captain Stone led survey missions to 17 different worlds that had been partially converted by the Devourers. Each planet told the same story of systematic extermination and transformation. The crystal beings had perfected their methods over 1,000 years of conquest, but had never encountered resistance like humanity provided. Nash coordinated the massive refugee relocation effort as millions of displaced Villani returned to their homeworlds. Many settlements had been completely destroyed and would need to be rebuilt from scratch. Human construction teams worked alongside alien engineers to create new cities designed to resist future crystal attacks. Foster was promoted to lieutenant colonel and tasked with training the first joint human Villani military units. The aliens learned quickly and showed remarkable adaptability when taught human combat techniques. Their natural grace and enhanced senses made them excellent soldiers when properly equipped and motivated. Elder Keth addressed the Galactic Council for the first time in 3 years, describing humanity's intervention and the complete destruction of the Devourer threat. His testimony was broadcast throughout known space and changed how every civilization viewed the new species from Earth. Humans had done something thought impossible. The reconstruction of Vila Prime became a symbol of cooperation between species. Human technology combined with Villani artistry created cities that were both functional and beautiful. The planet that had nearly become a crystal tomb was transformed into a monument to the power of unity and sacrifice. Morrison recovered from his injuries and was offered command of the new joint fleet that would patrol the outer systems. His ship New Horizon had been destroyed during the final battle, but he was given a replacement vessel bearing the same name. The exploration mission had become a liberation campaign. Admiral Clark stood in the memorial garden, dedicated to the human soldiers who had died during the campaign. Over 180,000 names were carved into black stone walls that reflected the light of Vila Prime's twin suns. Each name represented someone who had died for strangers they would never meet. The galaxy had learned what happened when predators encountered protectors. The Devourers had ruled through fear and mathematical perfection, but humanity had answered with something more powerful. Emotion sacrifice and the refusal to abandon others in their darkest hour had proven stronger than 1,000 years of crystal conquest. 5 years after the Villa Prime campaign, humanity had become a legend throughout known space, with stories of their sacrifice spreading to every corner of the galaxy. The Galactic Council, comprising 12 advanced civilizations, formally invited Earth to join as the 13th member. But the invitation came with a request that would change the course of galactic history forever. Ambassador Kate Phillips arrived at the Council chambers on Nexus Prime to discover that the galaxy was filled with species that had been hiding from the Devourers for centuries. Representatives from dozens of civilizations had emerged from their fortress worlds to attend this historic meeting. All of them wanted to meet the species that had answered a stranger's call for help. The Keth were masters of energy manipulation, who could have easily destroyed the Devourer fleet but had chosen to hide in parallel dimensions instead. The Morphic Collective were shapeshifters with incredible stealth abilities, who had watched 40 civilizations fall without intervening. The ancient archives were living libraries containing the knowledge of extinct races who had remained silent. During the Crystal Conquest, each species had convinced themselves that resistance was futile, and that hiding was the only logical response to the Devourer threat. They had created elaborate justifications for their cowardice while innocent civilizations were being destroyed. Now they faced the humans who had proven that standing up to evil was not only possible but necessary. Phillips walked through halls filled with alien dignitaries who whispered among themselves about humanity's incredible victory. Some showed admiration for human courage, while others displayed shame at their own inaction. The psychological impact of humanity's intervention had shattered the galaxy's acceptance of Devourer supremacy. General Hayes, formerly Commander Hayes, stood before the assembled alien representatives with scars on his face that told the story of humanity's sacrifice. His uniform bore decorations from the Villa Prime campaign, including the Order of Stellar Valor that had been created specifically to honor those who fought the Crystal Threat. The council session began with Elder Keth describing the final days of the Villani civilization before humanity's arrival. His testimony painted a vivid picture of desperation and approaching extinction that made many alien delegates uncomfortable. They had known about the Devourer attacks but had chosen to ignore the distress calls. When asked what humanity wanted in return for their service, Hayes surprised everyone with his response. He said that humans had not come to Villa Prime seeking reward or recognition. They had answered the call for help because it was the right thing to do and because no species should face extinction alone. The silence that followed this statement was deafening. Alien civilizations that had accumulated wealth and power over millennia were being lectured on moral responsibility by a species that was barely 400 years old. The lesson was uncomfortable but necessary. Captain Stone now. Admiral Stone commanded the new Terran Defense Fleet with ships bearing names like Never Forgotten answered Call and Fury's Edge. These vessels patrolled the outer systems, ensuring that no distress signal would go unanswered. Humanity had made a promise to the galaxy and intended to keep it. The Villani had made remarkable progress rebuilding their civilization with human assistance. Their children, who had been saved during the evacuation, were now the first generation to grow up free from the Crystal Terror. They called themselves the Remembered because humanity had not forgotten them when darkness fell. Dr. Carter was appointed as Director of Xenological Studies and established communication protocols with dozens of species that had been discovered since the Devourer defeat. Her office overlooked New Geneva Spaceport, where ships from across the galaxy arrived daily, carrying diplomats, traders, and refugees, seeking human protection. The economic impact of humanity's intervention was enormous as trade routes that had been closed for centuries reopened. Species that had isolated themselves began sharing technology and resources, creating a golden age of cooperation. The galaxy was healing from 1,000 years of crystal terror. Morrison led exploration missions to systems that had been abandoned due to Devourer attacks. Many contained the ruins of once great civilizations that told stories of resistance and defeat. These archaeological sites became monuments to the species that had fought alone without anyone coming to their aid. The Galactic Council voted unanimously to establish the Humanity Doctrine, which stated that any member civilization receiving a distress call must respond with immediate assistance. The policy was controversial but necessary to prevent another Devourer situation from developing. Phillips addressed the full Council Assembly describing humanity's vision for galactic civilization. She spoke about the importance of unity, cooperation, and mutual defense. Her words were broadcast to every world in known space and became the foundation for a new era of interstellar relations. The memorial on Vila Prime grew into a pilgrimage site where representatives from hundreds of species came to honor the human soldiers who had died fighting for strangers. The names of the fallen were translated into every known language, ensuring that their sacrifice would never be forgotten. New threats occasionally emerged in the outer systems, but they were met by combined fleets representing dozens of species working together. The galaxy had learned that unity was stronger than isolation and that standing together against evil was the only way to ensure survival. Carter kept a small crystal fragment on her desk as a reminder of the war against the Devourers. Sometimes in the right light she could still see trapped consciousness inside, frozen in its final moment of disbelief. The crystal beings had never understood why anyone would sacrifice themselves for others. Children throughout the galaxy learned about humanity's intervention at Vila Prime as part of their basic education. The story became a moral lesson about the importance of helping others and standing up to bullies. Human values spread throughout galactic civilization, changing it for the better. The message that had started everything continued to broadcast from Earth on frequencies used by hundreds of civilizations. It was no longer a cry for help, but a promise of hope that echoed across the stars. The transmission simply stated that if anyone needed assistance, humanity would come and that no species would ever have to face extinction alone. The stars no longer cried in silence because they knew that somewhere in the galaxy there was a species that would cross any distance, pay any price, and face any horror to answer their call. The galaxy had learned what happens when evil encounters those who refused to let others suffer, and the lesson would be remembered for generations to come.